Listen, there was a man in eastern Kentucky who woke up at 2 in the morning to find his tent zipper moving. Not rattling in wind, moving. Slow and deliberate, the outside pull drawing upward while his own hand held the inside pull pressed down. Both sides working at once, which anyone who has ever touched a zipper knows cannot happen. He had paid $12 for that campsite. The receipt was still in his jacket pocket. He left before sunrise and has never camped alone since. That is the 7th account tonight. But to understand why it matters, we need to start at mile marker 7. Forest Service Road 216 runs up out of Harlan County like it can't decide whether it wants to be a road or a creek bed. In wet weather, it's both. Marcus had driven it enough times as a kid that his hands knew the turns before his headlights found them. And when he pulled into Campsite 7 on a Friday evening in late September, he wasn't looking for anything except quiet. His divorce filing had gone through 11 days earlier. His sister had suggested a hotel. He had said he'd think about it, then packed his father's old canvas tent into the bed of his truck and driven up the mountain instead. He wasn't a man who talked much about feelings. He was a logger from Whitesburg who still used a paper map and kept his father's compass on his keychain, even though he didn't need it anymore. He took it camping the way you take something that belonged to someone you miss. That's all. The site was empty. The whole campground was empty far as he could tell. He backed in out of habit, facing the truck toward the road, and took his time unloading. Propane stove, 1 pot, 1 thermos of gas station coffee that had already gone lukewarm. The canvas tent took longer than it should have because the rain flies were tangled, and by the time he had it staked, he was sweating despite the cold. He left his wet socks on a low branch to dry. He left his boots outside the tent door, heels together, the way his father had always done it. The trailhead register was a few steps from the site. He checked it out of mild habit more than any real purpose, flipping through the logbook by headlamp. The last entry was dated 11 days prior. That was a Tuesday. He thought about that for a second. Tuesday, in late September, quiet enough that nobody else had been through since. Then closed the logbook and went back to make his soup. He ate slowly. The fire came from a stack of split wood left by a previous camper, dry enough to catch without much effort, and he sat in his folding chair and watched the coals until the coffee was gone and the night had settled in around the site the way mountain nights do. Not gradually, all at once. 1 minute, there was some residual gray in the sky above the ridge, and the next, there was nothing beyond the firelight except tree trunks and dark. He banked the coals, zipped the tent, and was asleep by 10. He did not know how long he had been sleeping when the sound came. 3 taps. Not a branch knocking loose. This had spacing to it. A pause between each one. The rhythm of something knocking politely on a door. It came from the right side of the tent, the uphill side, and it stopped as cleanly as it started. Marcus lay still for a moment. Wind, he told himself. Dead timber. Late September meant the first dry spells after summer growth, and the forest was full of standing dead wood that cracked and knocked when the air moved through it. He had heard worse sounds camping as a boy and had not thought twice about any of them. He closed his eyes. He listened to the creek. He went back to sleep. The second time, he looked at his watch. 2:14 in the morning. The tapping came again, 3 beats, even spacing, the same sound, but from the opposite side of the tent, the downhill side, across 6 feet of open ground from where it had been 40 minutes before. Marcus stopped moving. He lay completely still and listened to the tapping finish its 3 counts and then silence out. Then he listened to the creek. The creek kept going. Nothing else did. He told himself, dead branch caught on another branch. Wind swings it into contact, releases, swings it again. It could have been displaced enough in the wind to sound like it shifted sides. The acoustics in a narrow forest hollow were not always reliable. Sound bounced. He told himself all of that, and he kept his right hand closed loosely around the zipper pull. He did not open the tent. He was still holding the zipper pull when his eyes closed again. He slept lighter the second time, the kind of sleep where part of you is still listening, and nothing came to find that part of him. No third round of tapping. No sound from either side of the tent that didn't belong to the creek or the canopy. By the time gray light showed at the mesh panel of the tent door, his hand had relaxed. He sat up, stretched his neck, and reached for the zipper. Pulled it down and stepped out into the morning, and the first thing he noticed was the cold. The second thing was the fire ring, gone flat to ash overnight. The third thing was his boots. He had left them heel to heel beside the tent door. That was how his father had always placed them, and Marcus had done it since he was a teenager without thinking about it. They were not beside the tent door. They were 3 feet away, pulled back toward the tree line, toes pointing outward into the dark between the trunks. He stood in his damp socks and looked at them for a long moment without going to get them. The boots were his boots. His exact boots. Laces still tied the way he tied them. They had not blown over. They were upright. They had not rolled. They were boots. They were sitting exactly as they would look if someone had picked them up and set them back down, facing a different direction. His watch said 6:42. The forest was still enough that he could hear the creek without trying. He walked over and picked up the boots. Put them on. He did not look toward the tree line when he did it. The detail that stayed with him, the one he mentioned every time he told the account, was not where the boots were. It was that the insoles were damp. He had taken them off dry. The ash circle was the first thing Marcus photographed. He found it after he'd had a few minutes to stand in the cold and tell himself the boots had a reasonable explanation, that he'd sleepwalked, that the ground had been uneven and they'd somehow shifted, that he'd moved them himself in a half-awake moment he couldn't remember. He was working on believing one of those things when he walked around the tent to check the stakes on the uphill side and saw the disturbance in the ash. The fire ring was a standard campsite setup. Flat stones arranged in a circle about 2 feet across. He had banked the coals the night before, raked them inward, and the ash had settled in a clean, undisturbed layer. That part was still true. Inside the ring, the ash was fine and even, but surrounding the tent, starting at roughly 6 feet out on every side, the ground ash, the light gray powder that drifts from a campfire and settles on everything downwind, had been disturbed in a continuous ring. Not scattered, not kicked. Disturbed in a path like something had walked a slow circle around the tent in the night, and the ash had recorded each step. He took the photograph from up on his folding chair because he wanted to see the whole ring at once. When he looked at the image later on his phone, he noticed the ring had a gap. One section, on the side facing the tree line, was unbroken. Everything else was disturbed. That one section was clean. Like whatever made the circle had come from the trees and gone back the same way without completing the loop. Marcus broke camp in under 20 minutes. He didn't rush exactly, but he didn't linger either. He folded the tent without drying it, packed the stove without wiping it down, left the split wood where it was for the next camper. He took one more look at the ash circle from a standing position, committed it to memory, and loaded the truck. He stopped at the trailhead register on his way out. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he just wanted to read the last entry again, the one from 11 days ago, as a way of confirming someone else had been here recently and nothing had happened to them. The page wasn't there. He had turned to the last entry the night before. He remembered the date the signature, the small, neat handwriting. Now, the page was gone. Not blank, not faded. Torn. A clean strip of paper left along the spine where the page had been removed. He stood at the register for a moment with the morning forest quiet around him. Then he closed it, got in his truck, and drove down the mountain. The gas station at the bottom of Route 216 was the kind of place that had been the same gas station for 40 years, the same 2 pumps, the same hand-lettered price sign in the window. An older woman was behind the counter when Marcus came in to pay for his gas. He set a folded bill on the counter and she looked down at his receipt, still stapled to the self-pay envelope from the campsite. She looked at the site number. Her expression didn't change much. She wasn't the kind of person whose expression changed much, but she looked up at him and said, "How long were you up there?" "1 night," he said. She nodded slowly. Then she said, "People don't camp at 7 nights in a row. That's just how it is up here." Marcus looked at her. "Is that a rule posted somewhere, or it's just what people know?" That was the whole conversation. She slid his change across the counter and that was that. He sat in his truck for a minute before pulling out. He thought about what she'd said. 1 night. He had only booked 1 night. He hadn't been planning to stay 2. So the warning, if that was what it was, didn't apply to him. He had already followed the rule without knowing the rule existed. But then he thought about the boots, the damp insoles. And he thought about the ash circle with its gap on the tree-lined side and the deliberate 3-count tapping that had moved from one side of the tent to the other in the time it took him to fall back asleep. If the rule was don't stay 2 nights, what did that mean for the first night? He drove home without calling his sister back. He'd told her he'd check in when he had service. He had service now. He kept the phone in his pocket. 3 weeks later, he sat at his kitchen table and looked at the photograph of the ash circle on his laptop screen. He had zoomed in on the disturbed section, the part that formed the walking path around the tent. The disturbance was directional, not random scuffing, but a line. A series of overlapping impressions moving in one direction, counterclockwise around the tent. Slow. Deliberate. He zoomed in on the gap at the tree-lined side. He had thought it meant whatever made the circle came from the trees. He looked at it again for a long time. The gap wasn't at the beginning of the circle, it was at the end. The disturbance started near the tree line and moved counterclockwise around the tent, past the right side, across the front, around the left, and stopped just before completing the loop. Just before returning to where it started. Not coming from the trees, going back. He called his sister the next day and told her he'd had a good weekend. He told her the campsite had been quiet. The thing he could not explain, the one detail he kept returning to, the thing he'd eventually post about on a camping forum years later with the identifying location changed, was not the circle. It was not the gap. It was the insoles. He had taken those boots off dry. He had placed them beside the tent door, laces tied, heels together. He had done that before getting into a tent he had zipped shut from the inside. And sometime between 10 at night and 6:40 in the morning, the insoles of those boots had become damp. Not the outside of the boots, not the soles. The insoles, the interior, carrying the particular cold dampness of grass, walked in the dark. His father's compass was on his keychain. It still is. He just doesn't take it camping anymore. The next account comes from a family in Letcher County. They rented a cabin. They knew about the back room. They went in anyway. The cabin was listed as sleeping 6, which was more space than the family needed. But Ray had found it cheap enough that the extra rooms felt like a bonus rather than an excess. 4 bedrooms, a working wood stove, a covered porch with a mountain view. All of it for a Friday to Sunday rate that Ray had screenshot and sent to his brother with the message, "You believe this." His brother had written back, "Check for hidden cameras." Ray had laughed and booked it anyway. This account comes from Della, who was 41 when she told it, and who says she tells it the way her mother told it to her, which means some details shift depending on who's remembering. The cabin was on a hollow road off Route 119 in Harlan County. The owner lived in Middlesboro and wasn't present. Della's father, Ray, drove, her mother, Lynn, rode passenger, and Della and her younger brother, Cole, 17 at the time, rode in the back with the cooler wedged between them. They arrived on a Friday evening just as the light was going flat and gray over the ridge. The hollow road was one lane, no shoulder, the kind of road where you commit to the direction you're going and trust that nobody's coming the other way. It took them down into a cut in the hillside where the trees closed overhead, and the temperature dropped noticeably, and then the cabin appeared at the end of a short gravel drive. It was older than the listing photos had suggested. The porch boards were softer than they looked, but the wood stove worked. Ray confirmed that first, and Lynn had the cooler open and dinner organized before the sun finished going down. Cole found the guest book on the kitchen shelf while Lynn was unpacking. He read the entries aloud for the benefit of the room. A family from Cincinnati who'd seen 3 deer from the porch, a couple who'd celebrated an anniversary, someone who'd driven up from Knoxville and written 3 paragraphs about how peaceful it was. Cole did the voices. Della laughed. Ray was checking the flu. The second to last entry was from 4 years prior. Cole read it without a voice this time, just flatly, because the entry was short. It said, "Don't use the back room, we mean it." Signed with 2 initials and nothing else. Ray said, from across the room, "Someone pulling a prank on the next guests." Cole closed the guest book and put it back on the shelf. The cabin rules were posted near the front door on a laminated card. No outdoor fires after 10. No access to the storage shed. No access to the back bedroom, listed as not included in rental. Maintenance issue. Della read the card while Lynn arranged the propane heater and noticed that the back bedroom appeared on the hand-drawn floor map stapled below the rules. 4 rooms, clearly sketched, but someone had crossed it off with a ballpoint pen. Not printed, handwritten. Recent enough that the ink was still dark. She didn't say anything about it then. She wasn't sure why. They ate dinner at the kitchen table. Cheap wine for her parents, sodas for Della and Cole. The wood stove had the main room warm enough to take their jackets off, and the conversation went the way family conversations go when everyone is comfortable and no one has anywhere to be. Cole complained about his school schedule. Lynn asked Della about her job. Ray ate 2 helpings and said the cabin reminded him of a place his uncle had owned up near Cumberland. By 9, Cole had claimed the largest front bedroom and was already on his phone. Ray and Lynn turned in by 10. Della sat up a little longer on the couch with a book she wasn't really reading, listening to the wood stove tick as the fire settled and the propane heater cycled. Old cabins make noise. That part didn't bother her. The walls clicked when the temperature dropped, the porch shifted when the wind came down the hollow, and somewhere behind the kitchen the pipes made a low, irregular knock every few minutes. Heat expansion, the kind of sound you calibrate to quickly if you spend any time in old houses. Della grew up in a house with cast iron pipes. She knew the sound. It was around 11 when Lynn appeared in the hallway in her robe and said she could hear something from the back of the cabin. A faint tapping, she said. Rhythmic. Della listened. She could hear the stove. She could hear the wind against the porch screens. Ray came out and said it was the pipes. Heat pipes knock when the propane cycles, pressure changes, metal contracting. Perfectly normal. Lynn said all right and went back to bed. Ray went back to bed. Della sat with her book until the fire was mostly ash and the propane heater was the only warmth left, and then she went to her room. She was almost asleep when the heater clicked off. She lay in the quiet and listened to the cabin settle. No ticking pipes, no stove sounds. Just the hollow silence that comes when a heating system shuts down and takes all its noise with it. 3 taps. A pause long enough to breathe twice. 3 taps. She counted the pause. Counted it again. The rhythm was too even. Heat pipes knocked irregularly. That was the whole nature of thermal expansion. Metal moving at the mercy of temperature gradients. Unpredictable. What she was hearing had a structure to it. A spacing. The kind of spacing that meant something was producing it on purpose. Della lay still and did not wake her parents. She was not a person who spooked easily. She was an accountant from Pikeville who had once stayed alone in her grandmother's house for a week while the estate was being settled, and the only thing that had bothered her there was the smell of old carpet. She did not believe in things that went bump in the night. She believed in pipes that did not knock when the heat was off. She did not check the back room. She kept her door closed and her light off and listened until the tapping stopped. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, she lost the count somewhere. And then the cabin was quiet and stayed quiet, and eventually she slept. In the morning, she went to find her father. He was already up, already coffee in hand, standing in the hallway outside the back room door, not touching it, not doing anything, just standing there looking at it the way you look at something you're trying to understand without getting closer to it. Della stood beside him and looked too. The door was a standard interior door, nothing unusual. But across the frame, someone had nailed a 2x4, a single plank, horizontal, spanning the door at chest height. The nails were large, the kind used for structural work, and the wood was raw at the edges, the cuts still pale and unstained. Whoever had installed it had done so recently enough that the lumber hadn't had time to darken. Della looked at it for a moment and then took out her phone and photographed it. Ray said, "That's installed from outside." Della looked at the photograph. He was right. The nail heads were on their side of the door, in the hallway. Whatever was in that room could not have opened the door from the inside, but whoever had nailed the plank across the frame had been standing exactly where they were standing now. Ray didn't say anything else after that. He turned and went to make more coffee. Della stayed in the hallway a moment longer. The back room was quiet. Whatever the tapping had been, it was gone now, or it was waiting. She wasn't sure which possibility bothered her more. When she came into the kitchen, Ray was at the stove with his back to her, and the set of his shoulders was the set of a man who was deciding something. She had known those shoulders her whole life. She did not ask him what he was deciding. Later, after breakfast, she went looking for him to show him the photograph again, to point out the nail direction, and she found him back in the hallway, standing in front of the door, completely still, not touching the plank, not touching the doorknob, just standing there with his coffee going cold in his hand, listening to whatever was or wasn't on the other side. Ray made the call from the kitchen, standing at the window with his back to the hallway. He had the owner's number from the booking confirmation, and he dialed it with the particular deliberateness of a man who has already decided what he's going to say, and is mostly calling to be polite about it. Della sat at the kitchen table and listened to his half of the conversation. The owner picked up on the third ring. Ray explained who he was, gave the cabin name, said they had a question about the back bedroom. There was a pause on the other end. Then the owner said the back room had a structural issue and wasn't part of the rental. His voice was flat the way a recorded message is flat. Not unfriendly, not nervous, just uninflected. The voice of someone who had said this particular sentence before and had long since stopped putting anything into it. Ray asked what kind of structural issue. The owner said it was electrical. Ray said he understood, thanked him, and hung up. He stood at the window for another moment. Then he said, without turning around, "Electrical issue, that's why it's blocked off." Della said, "The nails are on our side of the door, Dad." Ray nodded once. He picked up his coffee. He did not say anything else about it. Cole surfaced around 9:30, rumpled and indifferent in the way 17-year-olds perfect without trying. He ate cold cereal and scrolled his phone, and only half listened when Della told him about the back room and the 2x4 across the door. His response was to push back from the table, take his cereal bowl with him, and walk down the hallway to look. Della and Ray both followed at a distance they didn't discuss. Cole stood in front of the door and looked at the plank and the nails with the mild interest of someone looking at a poster they didn't choose. Then he turned to them and said, "You can hear through these old walls easy, probably just the pipes." He was already bored of the conversation. Then he looked at the door again. He looked at it the way people look at things when they're doing a quick calculation, and whatever calculation he ran came out interesting enough to act on, because he went back to the kitchen and came back with a water glass and pressed its open end against the wall beside the door frame. It was an old trick. Sound conducts through solid material, through glass, into your ear. Cole's expression while he was doing it was the expression of someone who expected to confirm the obvious and move on. He did not move on. He held the glass against the wall for about 15 seconds. Then he took it away. He set it down on the hallway floor with a careful, deliberate movement, the way you set something down when you need both hands free. He straightened up. His face had changed. Della said, "What did you hear?" Cole shook his head. "Cole." He shook his head again. He said, "It's not pipes." And he walked back to his bedroom and closed the door, and he did not bring it up again for the rest of the weekend. Not on the drive home. Not at dinner 2 weeks later. As of the last time Della spoke to him at length, he was 29 years old, and he still had not said what he heard. The family was packed and in the truck by 2 in the afternoon. They had paid for Friday and Saturday nights. They were leaving Saturday afternoon. No one suggested asking for a refund on the second night. No one suggested it because no one wanted to make the phone call that would require explaining why they were leaving early, and explaining why would require saying out loud what each of them had separately decided they were not going to say out loud. So they loaded the truck in a quiet that was close enough to normal to pass, and Ray backed out of the short gravel drive, and the hollow road took them up out of the cut in the hillside toward the main road. Lynn spoke first. She said it quietly, not quite turning to Ray, more like saying it to the windshield. She said she'd looked back at the cabin as they pulled out. There was a light on in the back room window. Della, from the back seat, said, "Which window?" Lynn described it. The back corner of the cabin, the window on the south-facing wall. The one that belonged, by the floor plan's geometry, to the room behind the nailed door. The owner had said the issue was electrical. Pale light in an electrically compromised room. It hadn't been on when they arrived. It hadn't been on any time Della had passed through the hallway and glanced at the gap between the bottom of the door and the floor. If it had been on, she would have seen it. A lit room bleeds light under a door, and she was certain she had looked at least twice. Nobody said anything else for a while. The mountain road required Ray's attention, which gave everyone a reason not to talk. What Della came back to later was the guest book entry. "Don't use the back room, we mean it." 2 initials, no name, 4 years ago. At the time, Cole had read it aloud, and Ray had said someone was pulling a prank on the next guests, and everyone had moved on. But the entry wasn't addressed to the next guests. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was just a statement. A warning, left the way people leave warnings when they don't have time to explain, and they're not sure anyone will believe them anyway. The family had used the back room only to stand outside it. They had listened at the wall. They had read the room's absence from the floor plan and stood in its hallway and heard its tapping, and looked at the light it apparently was not capable of producing. Della told this account carefully. She said she didn't know what the tapping was. She said she didn't know what Cole heard. She said the light in the window might have been a reflection. Headlights from the road above, maybe, angling down through the trees in a way that caught the glass. She acknowledged that. She said she wasn't making any particular claim. Then she said the thing she actually couldn't account for. 3 months after the trip, she looked up the cabin's rental listing out of mild curiosity. She had the name of the property from the booking confirmation. She found it on the same platform, same photos, same description, almost the same floor plan. The back room was gone from the map, not marked as unavailable, not crossed out the way it had been on the laminated card in the cabin. It simply was not there. The floor plan showed 3 bedrooms. The hallway where the 4th door had been was a wall. Della said she refreshed the page twice. She checked to make sure it was the same property. It was. She didn't call the owner again. She didn't know what she would have asked him. The cabin still rents on that same listing. 3 rooms, if you look at the floor plan. A covered porch with a mountain view, sleeping up to 4. Reviews mention how peaceful it is. Della says the thing she returns to is not the light. It is not the nails, or the guest book, or even the missing page from the floor plan. It is her brother's face when he took the glass away from the wall. She has known Cole her whole life. She knows what he looks like when something is wrong. She knows what he looks like when something is bad enough that talking about it would make it worse. She had never seen him look the way he looked in that hallway until that moment, and she has not seen it since. The next account is shorter, but the people who've heard it from the drivers say short doesn't mean it stays with you less. Paul was not from McCreary County, which matters because the people who are from McCreary County know certain things about Route 927 that nobody posts on a sign. The road runs south out of Whitley City, through a stretch of mountain that doesn't get much traffic after dark. 2 lanes of county asphalt with the canopy closing overhead, and the hollow dropping away on the passenger side without a guardrail to mark where the road ends and the fall begins. Paul had driven it probably 200 times in the 3 years he'd worked highway survey for the district. He knew its curves the way you know a road you drive without thinking about it. This account comes secondhand. Paul told it once, the morning after it happened, to a co-worker named Gerald. Not the same Gerald, that name will matter in a moment. And Gerald repeated it later with the caveat that Paul was not a man who told stories, and was especially not a man who told stories like this one. The identifying details have been adjusted at the request of the person who shared this account, but the road, the night, and the sequence of events are repeated as they were told. It was a Tuesday in November. Paul finished a late road survey job around 11:15 and headed home the way he always headed home, south on 997, 11 miles to the turn, then another 6 into town. He had a thermos of coffee in the cup holder and a work order on the passenger seat and the radio playing low. The temperature was in the upper 30s. He'd had the truck's heat running since before dark. The first curve is a long, banking left about 2 miles south of Whitley City. Paul's headlights swept across the gravel margin on the right side, that narrow strip of rough ground between the white line and where the road just stops, and standing on the margin was a man. He was facing away from the road. That was the first thing Paul noticed, not facing the oncoming headlights the way a person stands when they want to be seen, but with his back to the road, looking into the trees. He was wearing a light jacket, the thin synthetic kind more appropriate for October than November. He was barefoot. Paul slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. The instinctive reduction of speed you make when a person appears at the edge of your headlights on a dark road. He looked at the man as he passed. The man did not turn, did not move. Stood with his arms at his sides and his bare feet on the cold gravel, looking at the trees. Paul drove on. He thought, someone from one of the properties up the hollow. Someone who'd had a difficult night and walked out to the road. Possibly drunk, possibly in some kind of distress, but standing upright and apparently uninjured. It was the kind of situation where you slow down, look, make a judgment, and continue, because stopping alone on a mountain road at 11:30 at night to approach a stranger is its own kind of risk. And Paul was a practical man who had lived in these mountains long enough to understand that people sometimes needed to be outside at night, and that this was their business. He checked his rearview mirror. The man was in the same position, facing away, arms at his sides, not turning to watch the taillights, just standing there on the gravel in the cold. Paul drove another quarter-mile. The road curved right, then straightened, then curved left again. A long S-bend through a section where the trees grew close enough on both sides that the canopy blocked any ambient light from above. His headlights were all there was. He came out of the S-bend and his lights hit the straight section beyond it. The man was standing on the right margin of the straight section. Same jacket, same bare feet, facing away from the road. Paul's foot came off the gas before his mind had fully processed what he was seeing. The truck slowed on its own momentum while he looked at the figure in the headlights, the pale jacket, the dark hair, the bare feet on the cold asphalt margin, the stillness, the same stillness, the exact same posture with the arms at the sides and the back to the road. He had not passed the man. The man had been behind him. The S-bend was not a route a person on foot could cover in the time it had taken Paul to drive it. Paul knew that stretch of road. He had walked sections of it for survey work. The S-bend was a quarter-mile of curves with soft shoulders on both sides. A person running full speed on a flat surface might cover a quarter-mile in a minute and a half. A person in bare feet on mountain road curves in the dark, going uphill, could not. Paul did not stop. He did not slow down again. His foot found the gas and he drove. He watched his rearview mirror until the straight section disappeared behind the next curve. The figure did not move. He did not look in the rearview again after that. He drove the remaining 9 miles without looking at it once, which he later said was not a decision he made so much as something his eyes simply refused to do. He got home, he parked. He sat in the truck in his own driveway for several minutes before going inside. He did not tell his wife. He went to bed and did not sleep well, and in the morning he drove to the district office and told his coworker Gerald what had happened on 9/27 the night before. Gerald listened to the whole account without interrupting. When Paul finished, Gerald asked him to describe the jacket. Paul described it, light-colored, thin, synthetic, the kind with a quarter-zip collar. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said that description matched a jacket belonging to a man who had gone missing on Route 927 about 3 years prior. A man who had left his vehicle on the roadside one evening and walked into the tree line and was never found. The search had covered the hollow on both sides of that stretch of road. They had found nothing. The case was still open. Gerald was not the type of man who invented things to unsettle people. Paul knew that about him. Paul said, "What was his name?" Gerald told him. The missing man's name was Gerald Trent. Paul's co-worker's name was also Gerald, which is why the account changes that detail when it circulates. 2 Geralds in the same story makes people think it's being embellished. Paul drove a different route home for the next 2 years. He eventually transferred to a different district for a promotion, which required moving his family to a town on the other side of the county line. His old co-worker says Paul's voice still changes when the subject of 927 comes up. Not in a dramatic way, not in the way of someone performing distress. In the way of someone who made a calculation on a dark road and has spent 3 years wondering if the calculation was right. Gerald Trent's case is still open. The road is still there. The next account is different. It doesn't come from a driver or a camper. It comes from someone who was paid to know that mountain and still couldn't explain what he found. Calvin Doss spent 22 years with the Daniel Boone National Forest Service before he retired in 2019. And in those 22 years, he found things on trails that he could explain, and things he could explain less well, and one thing he has never been able to explain at all. He agreed to discuss that one thing in a recorded conversation conducted 2 years ago, on the condition that the specific trail location not be identified beyond the district. He was 71 at the time of the recording. He spoke the way people speak when they have been precise about language for a long time professionally, and have not lost the habit. This is what he said, reconstructed from that recording. The trail in question had been closed for 6 weeks at the time of the account. A landslide in early spring had taken out a 40-foot section of the path at the 1.4-mile mark, depositing enough material across the route that the district had gated the trailhead and posted closure signs while they assessed whether the damage warranted a full reroute or a simpler repair. The gate was a standard Forest Service setup, a steel bar on a post with a padlock. Doss had the key. The backup key was at the district office, 38 miles away. He was specific about that distance. He was doing a routine post-storm damage check. 3 days of rain had just cleared, and the district wanted current information on the slide area before scheduling a work crew. Doss parked his truck at the gate, confirmed the lock was intact, let himself through, and started up the trail with his field book and his radio. The morning was clear and cold. The trail surface was soft from the rain, good, readable mud for tracking water movement and erosion patterns, and Doss moved at a methodical pace, stopping every 100 yards or so to make notes. The first quarter mile was in reasonable shape. Some new erosion channels in the tread, a few small debris deposits from overhanging branches, nothing structural. He noted everything. The second quarter mile showed more significant runoff scarring, but nothing that would change the timeline for repair. At the 0.8-mile mark, he stopped. In the center of the trail, positioned with its base flat on the ground and its frame upright, was a child's backpack. Small, the kind sized for elementary school. Blue, with a cartoon design he later identified as a popular character from that period. Both zippers were closed. The pack was upright and level, set squarely in the middle of the trail the way you set something down when you intend to come right back for it. Doss stood and looked at it for a moment. He was not, he said, immediately alarmed. He was a practical man, and his first thought was practical. Someone had gotten past the gate. It happened. Hikers ducked locked gates with some regularity, particularly on trails they'd used before and felt entitled to. A family with a child, not reading or disregarding the closure signs, cutting in through the gate somehow. The child had dropped the pack or set it down and kept going. He photographed it from several angles before approaching. Then he noted something that adjusted his thinking. The mud on the trail was soft and continuous on both sides of the pack. He crouched and examined it carefully, moving in a slow circle around the pack without touching it. The mud was undisturbed. On the approach side, the direction from the trailhead, there were no footprints in the mud between his own and the pack. On the far side, the direction toward the slide, the mud was equally unmarked. 3 days of steady rain had softened the trail surface to a depth of roughly half an inch. Any adult or child walking this trail in the 72 hours since the rain stopped would have left impressions. He would have been following their tracks from the gate. There were no tracks. He examined the base of the pack. The bottom of the pack was clean and dry. Not trail dirty, not mud smeared the way gear gets when it sits on wet ground. Clean, as if it had been set down after the mud dried. But the mud had not dried. The mud around the pack was still soft enough to take a clear print from the toe of his boot when he tested it. He called it in on the radio. Got static on the first attempt, which was common in that hollow. Got through on the second. He reported the find, gave his location, and was told to secure the pack and continue the survey. A missing persons check would be run on the description. He opened the pack. Inside, one granola bar wrapper, empty and folded. One child's rain jacket, yellow, size small. One small spiral notebook with a mottled black cover. He opened the notebook to the inside front cover. A name was written there in the careful, deliberate print of a child still learning to make letters consistently. A first name only. He did not read it aloud in the recording for several seconds. Then he said it. Kelsey. The missing persons check came back before he finished the survey. No current reports matching the description. No child of that name or approximate age reported missing in the district or adjacent counties in the active reporting period. Doss logged this in his field book. He bagged the pack, completed his notes on the slide area, and walked back down the trail to his truck. He sat in the truck for a while before driving. He had found things on trails before. He was precise about this distinction when he said it. He knew what gear looked like when it was dropped by someone frightened or exhausted or moving fast. He knew what it looked like when someone set something down to rest and forgot it. He knew what it looked like when children abandoned things they'd decided were too heavy. That pack had been placed. There was a difference, he said. Anyone who had spent enough time on trails would know the difference. The trail was still closed. The gate was still locked. The mud remembered everything that had walked on it that morning, and it remembered only him. He drove back to the district office with the pack in an evidence bag on the passenger seat, and the name written in a child's careful print stayed in his head the way things stay when they don't have anywhere to go. Kelsey. The missing persons check had come back clean. No current reports. It had not occurred to him yet to run the name against older records. That would come later. What stayed with him on the drive back was simpler and more immediate than a record search. It was the mud. The continuous, unmarked, rain-softened mud on both sides of a pack that was dry on the bottom and centered on a trail that had been locked and gated for 6 weeks. He did not have an explanation for the mud. He said this plainly, without drama, the way a man states a fact he has had years to sit with. He had no explanation for the mud, and in 22 years of trail work he had learned that mud was one of the most reliable things in the forest. It showed you what had been there. It showed you what hadn't. The mud showed him nothing had been there. The pack was there anyway. The name Kelsey Vance appeared in district records dating back to 2003. Doss found it a week after the trail discovery, after a records clerk at the district office ran the first name against cold case files in the surrounding counties at his request. He had not expected the search to return anything. When it did, he sat with the file for a long time before he read it through. Kelsey Vance, 9 years old. She had gone missing on a hiking trail in the same district in late September of 2003, during a family day hike on a trail that intersected, several miles north, with the one Doss managed. The family had stopped for lunch at a switchback overlook. When they packed up to continue, Kelsey was not with them. The search operation had been extensive. Dogs, grids, aerial survey, volunteers from 3 counties. It had run for 11 days before being scaled back and eventually reclassified as a cold case. No remains were ever recovered, no clothing, no gear. The case was still open at the time of Doss's discovery, 15 years later. Doss pulled the original case file photographs. Among them was a school photograph of Kelsey Vance used in the initial missing persons bulletin. He looked at it for a moment, then set it aside. Then he pulled the file's inventory of items Kelsey had been carrying on the day she disappeared, compiled from her parents' statements. The inventory listed, among other things, 1 small blue backpack with a cartoon design, 1 yellow rain jacket, and 1 spiral notebook. He sat in the records room for a while after that. The backpack design he had noted in his field report matched the style, but backpack designs repeat across years and manufacturers, and a general cartoon style was not specific identification. He knew that. He was careful about what he concluded versus what he observed. He observed that the described items matched. He did not conclude they were the same items. He noted both facts in a supplementary report and filed it with the original discovery report. He also noted the notebook. He had cataloged it as evidence without reading it further past the front cover. The records clerk pulled the evidence bag and Doss opened the notebook there in the office, going through it page by page. The pages were blank. All of them, front to back, except for the name on the inside cover. He returned to the trail exactly 1 week after the initial discovery. The gate was locked the way he had left it. His key, the same key, no sign of tampering. He walked the trail with his field book and the quiet focus of someone conducting a second survey who was also, without quite admitting it to himself, looking for something specific. The mud had dried in the intervening week. The trail surface was harder, less readable. He made his notes on the slide area, which was unchanged, and on the trail's general condition, which had improved with the dry weather. He walked further on the second trip than he had on the first. Past the 0.8 mile mark where the pack had been, nothing there now, the trail surface unremarkable, and on toward the 1.2 mile mark. The trail register was mounted there, a standard Forest Service setup. A green metal box on a wooden post, hinged lid, padlocked. Doss had the key for this lock as well. He opened the box. The register contained a single sheet of paper. He would describe this moment several times in the recording, each time with the same measured pace, the same careful language. The sheet was standard register paper, the pre-printed form the district used, with fields for date, party size, intended destination. Most of those fields were blank. The date field was filled in. The intended destination field was blank. In the space below, where hikers sometimes left comments, 2 words had been written in pencil. Still here. The handwriting was a child's. Careful, deliberate. The letters formed with the particular effort of someone still learning to make them consistent. He recognized it from the notebook's front cover without needing to compare them directly. The date written on the form was the exact date Doss had found the backpack 1 week prior. He stood at the register post for a moment. The hollow was quiet the way it had been on his first visit. The particular quiet of a closed trail, no voices, no other footsteps, just the sound of the ridge above and the distant movement of water somewhere below. He looked up the trail toward the slide area. He looked back down toward the trailhead. He was alone on the trail. He had been alone on the trail both times. The register box was padlocked. He had the only field key. The district office backup key had not been signed out. He checked this later. The lock showed no sign of forced entry. The hinges were intact. He removed the sheet carefully, photographed it in place first, then placed it in an evidence bag from his kit. He filed a report. The report was received by the district office and logged. No follow-up investigation was generated. Doss was told the matter would be reviewed, which in institutional language meant it would sit in a folder and wait for someone to decide what category it belonged to. He pushed the matter. He asked specifically about the paper's condition, because this was the detail that had been working at him since he'd first touched the sheet. The paper was not degraded. It was not yellowed or brittle or water damaged. It looked like paper that had been placed in the box recently. But the district office informed him that the register box had been completely replaced in 2015 following a vandalism incident. All prior entries, whatever their date, would have been lost in that replacement. The current box and its contents should contain nothing predating 2015. The paper's condition was consistent with recent placement. Its date was 15 years prior. These two facts did not fit in the same box, and Doss knew it, and the district office did not have a framework for discussing it. He transferred to a desk position in the district office 6 months after the second trail visit. He said it was for practical reasons: his knees, the mileage, the accumulation of years of trail work on a body that had been doing trail work since his early 30s. All of that was true. He retired the following year at 70. In the recording, the interviewer asked him what he thought had put the paper in the box. Doss was quiet for a moment. Then he said he didn't think the question had an answer he was qualified to give. He said he had filed the correct reports. He said he had done everything by protocol. He said the thing he could not account for, the thing that had stayed with him through the desk job and through the retirement and through the 2 years since, was the paper's condition. Just the paper. It should have shown its age. It did not. Kelsey Vance's case remains classified as a cold case. The trail remains closed. Doss still has the photograph of the register sheet on his phone, the evidence bag copy, not the original. He said he looks at it sometimes, not often, occasionally. He said the handwriting bothered him most, the care in it, the way a child writes when they are trying to do something well, when they want the letters to come out right. 2 words centered on the page, written as if they mattered. Still here. The trail is still closed. The next account is not from a ranger or a driver. It comes from a community, a small one, up in a holler above a creek called Stillwater. And in that community, there are things people know and things people do not explain to outsiders. The holler above Stillwater Creek is the kind of place that doesn't appear on most maps with any useful detail. The road in is unpaved for the last 1.5 miles, a single lane of packed gravel that follows the creek bed closely enough that in a wet spring, the road and the creek become briefly indistinguishable. There are 6 properties in the holler. The families on those properties have been there long enough that the land and the people have shaped each other in ways that are difficult to separate. This is not unusual in this part of Kentucky. It is simply how some places are. This account comes from a woman named June, 63 years old, who grew up in the holler and whose family owns the 3rd property up from the road. She spoke to the narrator at a community event in Harlan County and agreed to be recorded. She said she tells it the way her mother told it to her, and her mother's version and her own version agree on every important detail. The names of other living people have been changed. Every family in the holler above Stillwater Creek knows not to camp on the upper field. The upper field is a flat section of open ground above the timber line on the family property, maybe 2 acres of grass that gets full sun in the summer and sits high enough above the holler that on a clear night you can see the ridge on the far side of the valley. It is not a remarkable piece of ground to look at. From below, from the cabin, it appears as a pale rectangle against the darker tree line, visible after dark, because the grass catches whatever light there is when the woods do not. 3 families in the holler have camped on the upper field over the years, despite knowing the rule. June says none of them will say what happened up there. All three families left the holler within a year of the night they spent on the field. One of them sold quickly, below value, and did not negotiate. June's nephew Travis came back to the family property in late September, 5 years after moving to Knoxville for work. He was 26. He had gone to Knoxville after his grandmother's death, when the family had collectively agreed to hold the property rather than sell it, but had not collectively agreed on what to do with the cabin. Travis had offered to come back and clear it out, check the systems, see what needed attention before winter. He was a construction worker. He was practical and competent and not given to what he called, in June's telling, making things into something they aren't. He drove up the holler road on a Friday afternoon, unlocked the cabin with the key June had mailed him, and found the place dusty but structurally sound. The wood stove needed a new flue gasket, which he improvised with foil tape until he could get the right part. The generator started on the third pull. He swept the porch, got the heat going, found a can of soup in the cabinet above the stove and heated it for dinner. He called his mother before the signal dropped. June's sister, who had grown up in this same holler and still visited twice a year. He told her the cabin was fine. She asked a few questions about the stove, the roof, the front steps, and then she said, "Don't camp up on the field, sleep in the cabin, I mean it." Travis said he wasn't planning to camp. He had his sleeping bag, but he was going to use the bed. She said good. She said it the way people say things they mean more than the words suggest. He thought about that after he hung up and the signal dropped and the generator hum filled the cabin. He had never camped on the upper field. As a boy, he had run up there in the afternoons and flown a kite once with his grandfather, and watched his grandmother call the name of a dog that had gotten loose into the upper tree line. He had no particular feeling about the field. His mother's tone carried a weight that the words didn't justify, and he noted it and set it aside, because he was practical, and he was not planning to sleep outdoors anyway. After dinner, he walked the property the way you walk ground you haven't seen in years. Slowly, checking things, recalibrating the distances that memory compresses. The creek was lower than he remembered. The storage shed needed a new hasp. The porch steps had one soft board, second from the top. He walked up toward the upper field, not to camp, just to see it. He told June later that he hadn't planned to go all the way up, but his feet kept going and the evening was clear and the field was only 100 yards above the timber line. At the field's edge, where the tree line gave way to open grass, he found the fire ring. It was stone set, permanent, built by someone who knew how to build a fire ring for regular use. The stones were chosen for size and fit, stacked with care. Old construction. But the ring was clean. No ash. Not recently cleaned, the way you rake a fire ring before leaving. There was no ash residue in the soil around it. No charring on the inner stone faces that hadn't been weathered smooth over many years. Someone had been removing the ash after every use, not leaving it, taking it. He stood at the field's edge and looked at the ring. Then he looked at the ground around it. The grass was soft from recent rain. At the edge of the ring, pressed into the mud at the grass line, was a single boot print. One print, deep and clear, the tread of a work boot, pointing toward the center of the field. No print facing back out, just the one going in. He photographed it and walked back down to the cabin. He did not mention the fire ring to his mother when he thought about calling her back. He wasn't sure why. He heated water for coffee, found a deck of cards, sat at the kitchen table for a while. The generator ran. The cabin creaked the way old cabins creak, the particular language of settling wood and temperature change. He was on the porch, watching the last light leave the sky above the ridge, when he heard it. From the direction of the upper field, faint, directional, unmistakable once he identified it. the sound of something moving through tall grass. Slow and steady, the sound of a deliberate walk, not the random sway of wind and not the startled movement of a deer. Something moving through the field the way a person moves when they are not in a hurry. He listened. The sound continued for about 2 minutes. Then it stopped. He told himself deer. He told himself wind moving in a pattern through the upper grass. The kind of sustained directional movement that a ridge channeling air could produce. He told himself several things. Then he went inside and locked the door. He left the porch light on. He checked the lock twice before he sat down. June called her sister that night after Travis's check-in call. June's sister said Travis had confirmed the field rule and wasn't planning to go up there. June said that wasn't what she was worried about. Her sister asked what she meant. June said, "I'm worried about what comes down." She did not explain further. Her sister said she understood, which was true in the way that understanding in a family is sometimes more about shared history than shared information. Travis went to sleep that night with the porch light on and the generator running. In the morning, he walked the property again before coffee, checking the things a practical person checks first thing: the generator's fuel, the stove, the soft porch step. He took a photograph of the upper field from the porch. The field looked ordinary in the morning light. Pale grass, tree line, clear sky above the ridge. He did not notice anything wrong with the photograph until he was back in Knoxville the following week, going through his phone. At the far edge of the field, at the timber line, there was a pale shape. He had not seen anything standing there when he took the photograph. He did not remember seeing anything standing there at all. Travis spent a long time with that photograph on his phone screen, zooming in until the image broke into pixels and the shape lost whatever definition it had. That was the problem with looking at it too closely. At normal scale, it was clearly something. A vertical presence at the timber line that the grass and the trees around it did not account for. And at full zoom, it dissolved into grain and color noise and could be argued into nothing. He went back and forth between those two scales for longer than he wanted to admit, sitting at his kitchen table in Knoxville with the overhead light on and the rest of the apartment quiet. He did not call June that night. He called her 3 days later on a Wednesday evening and described the photograph without sending it. June listened without interrupting, which was characteristic of her. When he finished, she asked him how long he was planning to stay before he'd come home. He said he was already home. He was in Knoxville. She said she knew that. She asked if he was planning to go back to the property before winter to finish the work. He said probably one more weekend. There was still the shed hasp and the porch step, and a section of gutter pulling away from the fascia on the north side. June said, "Then finish it in one day. Don't stay a second night." He said he'd try. She said, "Travis, don't stay a second night up there." He heard the difference between the first and second time she said it. The first was a suggestion. The second was not. He said he understood, and they talked about other things for a while, and he did not send her the photograph. He went back the following weekend. He left Knoxville early on a Saturday, drove the 3 hours with the windows cracked and the radio on, pulled up the Holler Road by 9 in the morning. He planned to work straight through and be back on the main road before dark. That was the plan. The shed hasp took 40 minutes. The porch step took an hour because the softboard was worse than he'd assessed. The joist beneath it had water damage, and he had to sister a new piece alongside it, which required a trip to the hardware store in town and another hour of driving. The gutter took less time than expected. By 2 in the afternoon, he had worked through the list and had another 2 hours of daylight available. So he started on a fourth thing he hadn't planned to touch, the cabin's crawlspace access panel, which had been painted shut and needed to be freed before winter moisture made it worse. That took longer than it should have. By the time he cleaned up and assessed the daylight, it was past 4. The holler road in low light was manageable but not comfortable, and the county road below it after dark had no shoulder on the creek side. He sat on the porch and did the calculation and told himself he would leave by 5, which gave him enough margin. June called at 4:30. She asked how the work had gone. He said well. She asked if he was heading out. He said soon. There was a pause and she said, "Call me when you're on the main road." He said he would. He did not leave by 5. He was not sure afterward what had held him. He had finished the work. He had his bag packed. He sat on the porch with a cup of instant coffee and watched the light drop off the ridge and told himself he would get up in a minute. And then, the minute passed and another one came, and the field above the timberline was still visible as a pale rectangle against the darkening tree line, and he was still sitting there. By the time he went inside and got his bag, it was full dark. He made a reasonable decision. The holler road in full dark with his headlights on was not dangerous if he took it slowly, and he had driven it that afternoon with no difficulty. He was not staying the night. He was leaving now, just later than intended, which was a normal thing that happened to people doing physical work on old properties. He locked the cabin door. He went to start the truck. He got in the truck. He put the key in. He sat there. He was not sure how long he sat. He told June afterward that he had intended to start the truck immediately, and something had made him wait, though he couldn't say what. The porch light was on. Its reach ended at the grass line about 30 feet from the cabin, and beyond that was the dark that collects in a holler on a moonless night, which is a specific and total dark that people who have not experienced it tend to underestimate. He started the truck. He was backing out of the gravel space beside the cabin when the sound came from the upper field. The same sound as the first night, movement through tall grass, slow and steady, but it was not coming from above the timber line. It was coming from below it. From the lower yard, between the tree line and the cabin, in the dark space his porch light did not reach. He stopped the truck. He sat with the engine running and his foot on the brake, and the red wash of his brake lights on the gravel behind him. The sound moved, slow and even, crossing the lower yard from his left to his right, following a line that would bring it around the front of the cabin toward the porch steps. He left the truck running. He did not turn the headlights toward the sound. He sat with the brake lights giving him the only rearward visibility and watched the porch through his windshield, the lit rectangle of the door and the steps and the reach of the porch light ending at the grass. The sound reached the porch. He heard the steps, one board, then the second, then the soft board near the top that he had replaced that afternoon. It took the soft board the same way he took it. The weight shifted to the outer edge where the support was better, and then the porch boards, one by one, slow and even, moving from the steps toward the front door. At the door, the sound stopped. Travis did not move. He sat in the truck with the engine running and his hands on the wheel and watched the porch door. The screen door was closed but not latched. The main door was locked. He had locked it himself, checked it twice. The screen door moved, not opened, settled, the way a screen door settles when weight is placed against it from outside. He sat completely still. He watched the porch. He counted, the way you count when you need to do something with your mind while your body is not doing anything. He got to 200 before the screen door resettled and the porch boards began again, moving in reverse, away from the door, toward the steps, slow and even. He counted the steps, 3 of them going down, then the lower yard, then nothing. He sat in the truck for 20 more minutes. Then he drove down the holler road without turning the headlights off and without stopping and called June from the main road with hands that were not entirely steady. She picked up on the first ring. She did not sound surprised to hear from him at that hour. She asked if he was on the main road. He said yes. She said good. He said he wasn't coming back to finish the crawlspace access. She said she knew. He asked her what was up there. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I don't know what it is. I know what it isn't. It isn't anything that comes when it's not invited." He started to ask what that meant, and she said, "Travis, you didn't invite it. Go home." He went home. In the morning, June drove up to the property to check it, the way she did periodically. She called Travis from the porch. She told him the cabin looked fine. She told him the crawlspace panel was still sealed, which she thought he'd want to know. She told him the porch step he'd repaired was solid. Then she told him about the screen door latch. The latch was bent. Not broken, not forced. Bent, the metal tab folded at an angle that didn't correspond to the door being pushed from the outside. The bend was oriented the wrong direction for external pressure. It was bent as if something on the porch side, between the screen door and the main door, had pressed outward against the latch and held it. Travis said nothing for a moment, then he said, "The door was locked." June said, "I know." The family sold the cabin 2 years later. The buyer was a couple from Lexington who had found the property online and wanted a weekend place. They asked about the fire ring on the upper field. June's family told them it came with the property and was available to use. June says the buyers spent one summer there. They haven't been back since. The listing is still active. The upper field looks the same in the photographs as it always has. Open grass, timberline, clear sky, pale and unremarkable. The last account is the one from the beginning. The camper, the zipper, and the one detail he says he still cannot make himself think about for too long. The journal came in a cardboard box at an estate sale in Breathitt County, Kentucky, mixed in with the kind of things that accumulate in a house over decades and end up in boxes, because no one can decide whether they matter. Old calendars, instruction manuals for appliances long gone, a coffee can of mismatched screws, 2 paperback novels with the covers torn off. The person who bought the box paid $4 for the lot. They were looking for the novels. They found the journal under the coffee can. It is a standard composition notebook, black and white mottled cover, the kind sold in every drugstore and dollar store in the country. The pages are handwritten in blue ballpoint, the handwriting identifiably male, according to a graphologist who examined a photocopy, though the graphologist noted this was an assessment, not a certainty. The ink and paper were consistent with materials available in the late 1980s or early 1990s, though again, assessment, not certainty. The journal spanned 6 days. The entries are dated by day number rather than calendar date, which is common in hunting and fishing journals, and suggests the writer was accustomed to keeping field notes of some kind. There is no name anywhere in the journal. There is no address. There is no last entry. The estate sale purchaser transcribed the journal and shared the transcription with several people over the following years, trying to identify the writer or the property. No identification was made. The original journal was eventually donated to a county historical society, where it has been received but not yet formally cataloged. The narrator received a copy of the transcription from the estate sale purchaser and has permission to share its contents. The writer will be referred to throughout as the writer. Day 1 reads the way good field notes read, specific and unhurried, the notes of someone comfortable in the outdoors and accustomed to paying attention to detail. The writer describes the drive-in, the condition of the logging road, the weather, the time of arrival. He describes the camp, a flat cut in the terrain approximately 2 miles up the road from the main highway, large enough for his truck and a tent with room to spare, sheltered on 3 sides by second-growth timber. He notes the creek, a small tributary running along the east side of the road below the camp, and the quality of the water. He fished that afternoon and caught 2 small ones and released them. He built a fire from dead timber he found within 50 yards of the camp. He turned in at what he estimated was 10 o'clock, the sky being his clock. The road, he noted in the Day 1 entry, was not on the county map he'd brought. This did not concern him. Private logging roads rarely appeared on county maps, and he had received directions to this one from a man he trusted. He had the directions written on a note card in his shirt pocket. He noted the entry to the road from the highway, a gap in the tree line marked by 2 concrete posts, and the distance from that gap to his camp as measured by his odometer, 2.1 miles. Day 2 is similar: fishing, weather, a note about a barred owl he heard in the early morning. The road surface, he observed, had some soft spots from recent rain, a section about a mile in where the drainage was poor and the gravel sat over clay, and the clay had softened to the point where his tires left clear impressions. He made a note to take that section carefully on the way out. The entry ends with a description of the evening fire and the temperature dropping after dark. Day 3 is where the journal changes pitch, though the change is subtle enough that you could miss it on a first reading. The writer drove out to the main highway in the morning. He wanted to check his mail. There was apparently a rural mailbox near the highway that served the property, or near enough to serve as a reference point, and to confirm the exit route after the rain. The drive out took 12 minutes by his watch. He noted this: the drive back in, returning to camp, took 22 minutes. Same road, same truck, same driver. He attributed it to the soft section. Going out, he'd been moving on memory. Coming back, he'd been more cautious, taking the soft clay stretch at walking speed. 10 minutes of difference for a mile of careful driving was reasonable. He noted the discrepancy and his explanation for it, and moved on. Day 4. Entry opens with a matter-of-fact observation that the writer has made a small error in his camp notes. The turn he uses to find the camp from the road, a distinctive double-trunk pine on the left side, is not where he recorded it. He found the camp without difficulty, but the turn was further up the road than his notes placed it. He checked his odometer when he arrived at camp. It read 2.6 miles from the highway entry point. His Day 1 note said 2.1. He considered the discrepancy. Odometer variation, he wrote, possibly a faulty initial reading, hurrying to get camp set up before dark. He made a new note. Camp is 2.6 miles from entry. He crossed out 2.1. Then he did a practical thing. He took his roll of surveyor's tape, the orange plastic ribbon used to mark trees and trail points, the kind of tape any field worker carries, and drove slowly back toward the highway, stopping every quarter mile to tie a strip of tape to a tree on the right side of the road at eye level. 4 strips, evenly spaced highway to camp. When he drove back in, following the tape, the camp was where the tape said it was. He felt better about this. He noted it in the Day 4 entry with the satisfaction of a man who has identified a problem and addressed it practically. Then he added one more note, almost as an afterthought, at the bottom of the page. The truck's engine, he wrote, sounded different on the return trip, louder than it should in the trees. He checked under the hood at camp and he found nothing wrong. He attributed it to the road getting narrower, the trees closing in more than he'd noticed on the way out. He wrote, "Road feels tighter going in than coming out," which doesn't make sense, but there it is. That evening, he walked the tape markers back toward the highway on foot, wanting to check the distance measurement independent of the odometer. He counted his steps. His stride was reliable. He'd measured it before, 30 inches. He counted 1/700 steps and stopped. By his stride measurement, 1/700 steps covered roughly 1/400 yards, which was not quite 8/10 of a mile. His camp was supposed to be a half-mile further. He stood on the road in the early evening with the forest quiet around him and the nearest tape strip visible on a tree trunk ahead of him, and did the arithmetic twice. Then he turned around and walked back to camp without completing the measurement. He wrote, "Either my steps are wrong or the road's longer on foot than by truck. I'll check again tomorrow." Day 4 ends there. Day 5 begins with 3 words at the top of the page, written in slightly larger letters than the rest of the entry, as if the writer had picked up the journal and written them before sitting down fully. Something moved the tape. He describes it without preamble. He had gone to start his morning routine: water for coffee, fire, the sequence of a man comfortable in camp, and had walked to the road to check the first tape marker out of a habit. The marker was present, but it was on the wrong tree. His Day 4 tape was on right side trees, tied at eye level, orange ribbon visible from the driver's seat. The Day 5 tape was on left side trees. All 4 strips moved from right to left, now facing inward toward the camp rather than outward toward the highway. The writer considered this for a long paragraph. He ran through the possibilities in the order a practical man runs through them. Wind could not untie and retie surveyor's tape. An animal could pull tape loose but could not reposition it on an opposite tree. A person could do all of these things, but the writer noted he had seen and heard no one on the road in 4 days. The road was private access, and he had no reason to believe anyone else knew he was there. He packed the truck that morning. He made the decision quickly and without what he described as drama. He simply assessed the situation and determined it was time to leave. He broke camp efficiently, loaded everything, and drove toward the highway. The drive out took 14 minutes. He noted this with relief. Same as Day 3, the first outward trip, before things had started not adding up. 14 minutes, 4 strips of tape now on left side trees which he drove past without stopping to retrieve them, and then the concrete posts and the highway and the ordinary noise of a paved road under his tires. He sat at the highway for a moment. He had forgotten his tackle box. He wrote about this decision with the rueful honesty of a man writing a journal rather than an account for other people. He knew he should leave the tackle box. He sat at the highway and knew it. The tackle box was good equipment, the kind built to last, with specific lures he had tied himself over several winters. He turned the truck around. The drive back in took 34 minutes. He found the camp without difficulty. The tackle box was on the wrong side of the tent. He was certain of its original position, left side, near the stove, because he had packed around it all morning and had made a deliberate decision to come back for it rather than include it in the load. It was now on the right side of the tent, placed upright, neatly, with its handle up and its latches facing outward toward the tree line. He left it there. He did not write about the drive back to the highway in the Day 5 entry. The Day 5 entry ends with, "Left the tackle box, not going back for it again." Day 6 is the last entry. Day 6 is written in a different rhythm than the first 5 entries. The sentences are shorter. The handwriting is the same. Recognizably the same hand, the same pen. But the spacing between words is slightly wider. The way handwriting opens up when the muscles controlling it are not entirely relaxed. The writer noted this himself in the entry. He wrote, "I notice my writing looks different today. I'm going to try to be accurate." He had slept badly. He did not describe specific sounds in the night, only that he had been aware of the forest in a way he had not been on previous nights. A kind of ambient alertness that prevented the deep sleep he normally had no trouble finding outdoors. He woke before light and lay in his sleeping bag until he could see the tent walls gray up. And then he got up and started the stove and made coffee and sat with it and wrote. He had decided to try leaving again that morning. He wrote this as a decision, not a plan. The distinction mattered to him, apparently, because he underlined the word decided. He was going to pack what remained, which was minimal, and drive to the highway. And this time he was not going to stop at the highway for any reason, and he was not going to turn around. He noted, with the careful accuracy he had promised himself, that he was not frightened. He wrote it twice, which is its own kind of information. He was not frightened. He was solving a problem. The problem was that the road behaved differently on different attempts, and he did not have an explanation for this, and the correct response to an unexplained problem in the field was to exit the field and seek the explanation from a position of safety. This was sound reasoning. He wrote it out as if presenting it to someone who might argue with him. He packed the truck. It took less time than the previous morning because there was less to pack. The tackle box was gone, which he noted without comment, and some of the camp supplies he had simply left rather than loading. He wrote that he left the camp stove. He wrote that he left the tent. He did not explain why he left the tent rather than breaking it down, except to say that breaking it down would have taken time he did not want to spend. He drove toward the highway. He watched the odometer. At the 2.1-mile mark, where his original notes had placed the camp, there was nothing. Flat road, timber on both sides, the surveyor's tape, now on left side trees, visible at intervals. He kept driving. At the 2.6-mile mark, where the odometer had placed the camp on day 4, there was nothing. He kept driving. He drove until the odometer read 4.0 miles from his camp starting point, and the road was still continuing ahead of him through the trees, with no sign of the concrete highway posts and no change in character. And then he stopped the truck and sat with the engine running and looked at the road ahead. He wrote about this moment at length. The road looked correct. It looked like the same road he had driven in on. The same gravel surface, the same tree canopy, the same soft section drainage area he had been careful about. The tape markers were present, properly spaced, on the left side trees where they had been moved. Everything looked right. The distance was wrong. He turned around and drove back to camp. He wrote, "I don't understand the road. I'm going to rest today and try again tomorrow when I'm not tired. A tired man makes errors. I may have made an error somewhere in my measurements and I can't find it right now. I have enough food. I have water. I'll try again tomorrow in full light." He wrote that the forest was quiet. He had noticed, over the course of the 6 days, that the forest sounds had changed, not disappeared, but shifted. The bird activity moving to different times of day than he expected. The creek sounds varying in a way that seemed independent of rainfall. He did not interpret these observations. He recorded them. The final paragraph of Day 6 reads as follows, transcribed exactly from the purchaser's copy. "One thing I want to put down before I stop writing for today. The road going out feels different from the road going in. I've driven it enough times now to know this isn't my imagination. Going out the trees feel further from the road, and the sky is more visible, and the distance feels shorter than the odometer says. Going in the trees are closer, and the sky disappears, and the distance is longer than it should be. I don't know how to explain this except to say it feels like the road going in and the road going out are not the same road. I know that's not possible. I'm writing it down because I want to be accurate. That is the last entry. There is no Day 7. The estate sale purchaser said the box had other items in it, as previously mentioned. The calendars, the manuals, the coffee can, the novels. At the bottom of the box, beneath the journal, there was one additional item the purchaser had not initially noticed because it had been folded flat and pressed against the cardboard. It was a length of surveyor's tape. Orange, the standard width, approximately 18 inches long. Knotted once in the middle, The knot tied the way you tie a marker knot. A simple overhand, functional, the kind of knot you make quickly in the field when you want the marker to stay. With it was a piece of paper, folded twice. The paper had been written on in a hand that was not the journal writer's hand. Different pen, different style, block letters rather than cursive. It said, "Found this at the gate." No truck at the camp, nothing else, no signature, no date. The purchaser made inquiries. The estate that generated the sale had belonged to a man who had died at 84 after a long illness, a retired county worker who had lived on the same property for 50 years. His family said the cardboard box had come from a storage building on the property, and that they did not recognize the journal and could not account for how it had come to be there. They did not know who had written the note. The county executor's records for the estate do not list the journal specifically among the personal property inventoried. It appears in the box with the other items and is not distinguished from them. There is no record of anyone being reported missing on a logging road in Breathitt County in the approximate time period the journal's materials suggest, which could mean several things. People do not always get reported. Private road access means no one knew to look in a particular place, or it means the writer made it out eventually and simply did not write it down. The purchaser, when asked what they believed, said they tried not to believe anything specific about it. They said the tape bothered them more than the journal. The journal was a person working through a problem, staying calm, being accurate. The tape was something that had been found at a gate by a person who had not signed their name. The knot is the kind you make quickly, the kind you make when you know how to make it, and you make it without thinking because your hands know the shape. The tape in the estate sale box was knotted once. That is how he marked every quarter mile. The last account is the one from the beginning, the camper, the zipper, and the one detail he says he still cannot make himself think about for too long. This is the account from the beginning, the zipper. But to understand what the zipper means, you need to understand where Derek was and what he was doing, and how long it had been quiet before he woke up. Derek was 31 years old, a middle school science teacher from Pikeville, Kentucky, and he had chosen Black Fork Campground specifically because it was low traffic in late September. He had looked at 3 other options before settling on it: a state park campground that would be too social, a dispersed site he didn't feel confident navigating alone, and a fee site he'd used twice before that had good reviews but was closer to the road than he wanted. Black Fork was 20 minutes further from everything, and the reviews mentioned solitude the way people mention it when they mean it. He booked Site 12. He needed the quiet. He had gotten through a school year that had been difficult in the ordinary ways school years are difficult, and in 2 or 3 ways that were not ordinary. And by late September, he was the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. His wife understood this about him. She was the one who had suggested he take a weekend alone, which was how he knew she meant it. She was not a person who suggested things casually. He arrived at Black Fork on a Friday afternoon, paid the fee at the entrance, and stopped to talk with the campground host. The host's name was Earl, an older man who managed the campground from a small trailer near the entrance with the easy competence of someone who had been doing the job long enough to stop thinking about it consciously. Earl gave Derek a site map, pointed out where the water spigot was, mentioned that the pit toilet near Site 8 had a sticky latch that required lifting while turning. Then Earl said, "You're the only one out here tonight. I'll be in my trailer if you need anything." Derek thanked him and drove to Site 12. Site 12 was the furthest site from the road, separated from the nearest neighboring site by a stand of hemlocks that made it feel more isolated than the campground map suggested. The site was level gravel with a fire ring, a picnic table, and a bear pole for hanging food. The hollow dropped away on the east side, the ridge rose on the west, and the sky above was the particular deep blue of a clear, late September evening that is not yet committed to being night. Derek set up his tent, a two-person tent he had bought 3 years earlier and used twice, well-maintained, the zipper clean and smooth. He was careful about the tent. He staked the corners evenly, checked the rainfly, checked the zipper twice before he started cooking. Both pulls were correctly positioned. Inside pull fully down at the base, outside pull at the same location on the outer track. He was a science teacher. He noticed things like correct positioning. He heated soup on his camp stove, ate at the picnic table watching the light leave the sky by increments, and called his wife before the signal dropped. He had 1 bar at the picnic table and 0 bars everywhere else on the site. He told her the site was good, the air was cold and clean. He'd be home Sunday. She told him to actually rest, not just change locations. He laughed and said he would try. The call dropped on his side before they said goodbye, which was fine. She knew the signal situation. He hung his food bag on the bear pole with a care that was slightly excessive for a campground this close to a road. But he was a methodical person, and the methodology was part of the point. He checked the knot twice. He checked the tent stakes once more. He banked the fire rather than letting it die completely, partly for warmth and partly because the fire's presence made the site feel less like the edge of something. Then he got into the tent, zipped it closed, and lay down with his headlamp and a book he had been meaning to read for 4 months. He read for less than an hour before his eyes started going. He turned off the headlamp, settled into his sleeping bag, and listened to the campground quiet down into the deeper quiet that comes after the fire goes to coals and the wind settles, and the trees stop their visible movement. The hollow below the site had its own sounds. Water somewhere, the particular creak of hemlock branches, an intermittent sound he identified as a small animal moving through the leaves on the slope. Normal sounds. The sounds a forest makes when it is doing its ordinary business at night. He was almost fully asleep when the first sound came. It was from the far edge of the campsite, the east side where the hollow dropped away. A dragging sound, slow, deliberate, the sound of something large moving across dry leaves without hurrying. It started and started again, the irregular pattern of something that was moving but not in a line, or something that was moving and pausing to assess. Derek lay still and listened. Bear, he thought. September was feeding season. Bears moving through campgrounds at night to investigate fire rings and picnic tables and improperly stored food. His food bag was on the bear pole. The fire ring was clean. He had done everything correctly. A bear, investigating a campsite where everything was done correctly, would find nothing interesting and move on. This was known and documented and not a reason to open the tent. He listened to the dragging sound work its way along the east edge of the site and then stop. Then the forest was quiet for a while, and he was drifting again. And then the sound returned. From behind the tent this time. The west side, closer to the ridge. The same dragging pace, the same deliberate rhythm, but repositioned. And then, once, a single footstep on the campsite gravel. One step, not two, not a series. One footstep, as if something had placed 1 foot on the gravel margin of the site and stopped. Deer walk campground gravel. This was also true. He knew this. He lay still and did not open the tent. It was while he was lying there, in the specific stillness of someone trying not to make noise, that he remembered something Earl had said during check-in. He had not registered it fully at the time because it had been delivered in the same flat, practical tone as the information about the water spigot and the sticky toilet latch, slipped in between ordinary pieces of campground information without emphasis. Earl had said, "If you hear something outside the tent at night, just don't answer it, whatever it sounds like." Derek had said sure. He had been looking at the site map. He thought about the phrase now. Whatever it sounds like. Not whatever it is. Whatever it sounds like. The distinction was specific enough to be deliberate, from a man who had been managing this campground long enough that his information about it was earned rather than procedural. Derek kept his hand loose around the inside zipper pull. He did not answer the single footstep. He lay in the dark and listened to the forest, and waited for the bear, or the deer, or the wind, or whatever had a reasonable explanation to finish its business and move on. For a while, nothing came. The coals ticked in the fire ring as they cooled. The hemlock branches shifted. The hollow made its water sounds. Derek listened to all of it with the specific attention of a person who has decided to be calm and is monitoring their own calm for signs of failure. He was holding it together fine, right up until the dragging sound started again. This time, it was directly outside the tent wall, inches away. Moving slowly from the back corner of the tent toward the front, toward the door, in the particular measured pace of something that knew where it was going and was not in a hurry to get there. Derek did not breathe. The sound reached the tent door and stopped. He was holding the inside zipper pull with his right hand. He was pressing it down against the base of the track. Not pulling, just holding, keeping it in place the way you keep something in place when you're not sure what is on the other side, but you want to maintain some relationship with the barrier between you and it. The outside zipper pull began to move, slowly, upward along the track, drawing the zipper teeth apart from the bottom, working against the downward pressure Derek was applying from the inside. Both pulls moving. Both sides of the same zipper working in opposite directions simultaneously, which is not how zippers work, which is not something that happens, which Derek understood completely, and which did not stop it from happening. He pressed down. The outside pull drew up. Neither side won. Both sides kept trying. The outside pull stopped moving first. Not because Derek had won, he hadn't won anything. He had held the inside pull at the base of the track with the particular grip of a man who has decided that whatever happens, this zipper is not going to open, and the outside pull had simply stopped, released. The tension on Derek's side of the zipper went slack, in the way a rope goes slack when the other end is dropped. He did not move. He lay in the tent and breathed through his nose in the slowest rhythm he could manage, and counted the seconds between breaths, and did not move his hand from the zipper pull. The tent fabric was dark. The coals were mostly dead. Whatever ambient light had been coming through the nylon was gone now, and the tent was the particular lightless dark that exists inside a sealed space at 3 a.m, in a hollow with no moon. He counted to 60. Nothing. He counted to 60 again. The vocalization came while he was counting the third time. It was not a word, it was a sound. A short, shaped exhalation, rising slightly at the end the way a question rises, the rhythm and cadence of someone asking something in a language he almost recognized. Not language. The shape of language. The architecture of a question without any of its content. And it came from directly outside the tent door, close enough that he could hear the breath behind it. Derek did not answer. He remembered Earl's words with a clarity that he later described as the kind of clarity that only exists in moments when everything unnecessary falls away. Whatever it sounds like. He pressed his lips together. He breathed through his nose. He did not make a sound. The vocalization came again. Same shape, same rising end, closer or louder or both. He could not determine which, and the distinction felt important in a way he couldn't articulate. Something was pressing against the outside of the tent door, not hard enough to deform the fabric visibly, but present enough that the fabric's tension changed. A slight increase in resistance that he could feel through the air in the sealed space, the tent becoming marginally smaller. He watched the door panel. The tent fabric was dark nylon, no light coming through, but he could see in the faint remaining warmth from the dead coals a slight distortion in the door panel's shape. A pressure shadow. The fabric pulled minutely inward at a point about 2/3 up the door, at the height where something outside might press its face. Derek did not move. He watched the pressure shadow and did not move. Then the shadow shifted, changed shape. The pressure on the door panel moved, and the tent's internal air shifted again, and he understood that whatever was outside was turning, repositioning itself the way something repositions when it is deciding what to do next. And then it said his name. He told the forum, the camping forum where the account was originally posted, before he deleted it and provided a saved copy, that the name was not wrong exactly. It was his name. The right syllables in the right order, the right number of sounds. But the rhythm was off. The emphasis was distributed differently than he had ever heard his name said by anyone who had known him for any length of time. It sounded like his name said by something that had heard it once, at a distance, and was now trying to reproduce it from memory. He said later that this was the thing he couldn't think about for too long. Not the zipper, the name, the trying. He did not answer. He understood, with a completeness that required no deliberation, that answering was the wrong choice. Not because Earl had told him not to answer, though Earl had told him not to answer, but because something in the particular wrongness of the name's rhythm told him that answering would constitute a different kind of contact than the one currently taking place. That there was a difference between being outside a tent and being invited in. He lay still. He controlled his breathing. He kept his hand on the zipper pull and did not answer his own name, spoken in the wrong rhythm by something he could not see. The tent fabric relaxed. The pressure shadow dissolved. The door panel returned to its normal tension. Silence. He counted. He got to 200 before he heard anything else, and what he heard was the dragging sound again, moving away from the tent door, slowly, with the same deliberate, unhurried pace it had used approaching. Moving away from the door, across the gravel at the front of the site, toward the east edge where the hollow dropped away. He kept counting. At 300, he heard the vocalization one final time. Further away, the same question shape, the same rising end, addressed, apparently, to the empty campsite and the dark hollow below it and whatever was down there to hear it. No answer came from down there either. Derek lay in the tent and counted and breathed and kept his hand on the zipper pull and waited. He waited through the silence that followed the final vocalization. He waited through the resumption of the normal forest sounds, the hemlock creak, the distant water, the occasional small animal rustle on the slope. He waited through the slow, incremental change in the tent fabric's darkness that meant, eventually, that light was beginning somewhere above the ridge, not visible yet but present. The darkness thinning by degrees too small to measure individually, but real, accumulating toward morning. When the seam at the tent door showed gray, not black, he moved for the first time. He reached up with his free hand and turned on his headlamp. He held it in the tent for a moment, pointed at the door, watching the door. Nothing. He sat up slowly. He kept the headlamp on and sat up and breathed and listened. And then, in the gray, pre-dawn light coming through the door's mesh panel, he looked at the campsite. Empty. The fire ring cold, a white ash pile in the still air. The picnic table with his camp stove on it. The bare pole with the food bag hanging correctly. The hemlock stand on the north side with no movement. The hollow below, dark, still but graying. The site gravel, pale in the headlamp, undisturbed. He unzipped the door from the inside, slowly, and stepped out. The cold hit him immediately, the specific cold of an October morning in a Kentucky hollow, and he stood in it and turned the headlamp slowly around the site. He went through a full circle. Nothing was wrong with anything he could see. The tent was intact. The food bag was secure. The equipment on the picnic table was where he had left it. He stood at the tent door and looked down at the ground. The dirt at the base of the tent door was scuffed and disturbed in a way that was inconsistent with his own entry and exit. The marks he had made getting into the tent the previous evening were on the outside of the disturbance, further from the door, lighter. The disturbance at the door itself was heavier, deeper. The ground compressed and worked in a pattern consistent with something kneeling or crouching in that position for an extended period. But the disturbance was on the wrong side. It was inside the tent's footprint, between the door and where Derek had been lying. The compressed earth, the worked dirt, the marks of sustained pressure. They were positioned as if something had been kneeling on Derek's side of the zipper. He stood at the tent door in the pre-dawn cold and looked at this for a long time. He could not account for it. The tent had been sealed. He had held the zipper from the inside for the entire duration. The door had not opened. He was certain of this with the certainty of a man who had held that zipper pull for hours and never felt it open. And yet the ground on the interior side of the door had been worked as if something had occupied that space, and he had been lying 3 feet away. He packed the tent without folding it properly, stuffing the nylon into the bag in a way that would require him to restake every seam before the next use. He loaded the truck in 6 minutes by his watch. He drove to Earl's trailer. Earl came to the door before Derek knocked. He was dressed. He had coffee. He looked at Derek with the expression of a man who recognized the specific condition Derek was in and had seen it before. Derek told him what had happened. He told it concisely. The sounds, the zipper, the vocalization, the name, the waiting. Earl listened without expression, nodding occasionally with the minimal nods of someone taking information rather than reacting to it. When Derek finished, Earl said, "Did you answer it?" Derek said no. Earl nodded. He looked at his coffee. He said, "Good." Derek asked what it was. Earl looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "I don't know what it is, but it's been here longer than the campground has." He did not say anything else. Derek did not ask anything else. There was nothing else that felt like it would produce a useful answer. Derek photographed the outside zipper pull before he drove out. The pull was bent. Not damaged, not broken at the attachment point. Bent, the metal tab angled slightly. The kind of deformation that occurs when something grips a small metal object and applies lateral pressure while pulling. He had held the inside pull for the same duration under similar pressure. The inside pull was unbent. He drove out of Black Fork without stopping. He was home by 9 in the morning. His wife looked at him and said he looked like he hadn't slept. He said he hadn't slept well. She did not push it. He found the granola bar wrapper on the hood of his truck when he went out to unload his gear. It was centered on the hood, placed upright, neatly, the way the tackle box had been placed in the logging road account, though Derek did not know that account and would not have found the comparison comforting. It was his granola bar wrapper from the snack he had eaten at the picnic table the previous afternoon before dinner. He recognized the brand, the specific flavor, the way he had folded the wrapper in half before putting it in his pocket. He had put it in his pocket. He had been wearing the same jacket all weekend. The jacket was inside the tent with him. The wrapper was on the hood of a locked truck, centered, neatly, as if someone wanted him to find it on the way out. Derek still has it. He keeps it in his glove compartment. He says he's not sure why. Maybe to remind himself that he did everything right. Maybe because throwing it away feels like something he's not ready to do yet. He still camps. He goes with his wife or with friends, never alone. Before getting into any tent, regardless of whose it is or where they are, he checks the zipper twice. He keeps one hand on the inside pull until he is asleep. His wife has noticed this. She has not asked about it. He drives past Black Fork sometimes on his way to other places. He has never stopped.